Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're continuing our series with Bailador, developing the canter with him. Now, Bailador has been a very difficult horse, as some of you know from earlier videos. We've taken a long time to get him to relax the way you see him now here in the walk. Now, one thing to point out here that we are considering on this particular day that we're starting, while it doesn't look very cold there, Amber doesn't have a coat on or anything, but it has been extremely cold here in San Diego for the last week or so, up to doing this, where it's been below zero almost every night of the week, which is almost unheard of here. And how that affects a horse, it means we're going to take a lot more time warming them up. You know, when horses come out in weather like this that they're not used to, and even if they are, extreme weather changes are always difficult on horses. We always have to be sure they're drinking enough water, one of the biggest things that we're concerned of. But they're certainly also going to be stiff, a little stiffer than normally when they come out. So while we have lunged this horse just a few minutes, as we always do starting him because of his back, as we want to warm it up before we put any weight up there, we've just found that he stays sound a lot better that way. So we had about a 10-minute warm-up just to get him stretching down and loosening up a little bit across his back before we put the weight up there. But we're taking quite a long time in the walk because you can still see here he even looks a little bit stiff still in the walk here compared to how he normally walks out. But once again, as I said, this is about 9 o'clock in the morning here that we're doing this, and it has been extremely, extremely cold. So they look a little bit stiff. So we take a little more time in the walk. Here she's coming down the center line, doing a nice leg yield. But once again, for this horse, just to be able to come out and stretch down the way you see him doing here and just not spook it, you know, every little thing around the arena or every sound, is a huge improvement and a step in the right direction for him. So plenty of warm up here in the walk because of that cold, as I'm talking about. It's getting a bigger step. You can see sometimes when he gets a little short and doesn't stretch the neck out, you can see how that affects the back legs. And especially since it's so cold here this morning, you can actually see that a little more. You can see how just a little stiff-legged he is there compared to how he normally walks out quite supplely. So we'll spend plenty of time in the walk, just letting him relax all the way down. Now, some takeaways here to take a look at. You know, the biggest thing that we look for here is how this horse now, for the first time since he's been back to us this last session, he isn't breaking at the third vertebrae anymore. So we finally had him in this stretch long enough that we've been able to heal that damaged area there in his neck. So we can see how nice and much straighter his neck out. It comes down and flexes at the pole now most of the time and not back in the neck. If you go back and look at some of the earlier videos of this horse, you'll see that he was behind the bit most of the time. Once again, because he was so severely broken in the neck that as soon as you ask him to stretch, they actually look behind the bridle. So the fact that he stays out and in the bridle and contact much better now is a huge improvement. Once again, another nice leg yield in the stretch there. Notice how we do all these exercises with the horse stretched all the way down. You can see actually there how much more fluid his hind legs got as he stretched into the movement. So we're always looking to be able to do everything in the stretch before we start bringing the horse up. And once again, finding that optimal stride. That's always the problem with these big horses. You've all heard me talk about that before. You know, many big horses get shortened down because the people that ride them aren't athletic enough to ride them. This horse has a very big swinging stride when he's correct. So we have to get them open and working at their full gait. Then the horse relaxes. That, I'm sure, was a frustrating thing for this horse, to always be held back. He always just felt like he just wanted to run. But now he's starting to relax and really swing forward. But once again, you can see how those hind legs look a little bit stiff this morning. Once again, that's pretty much from the cold. But we must take all these things into consideration, you know, when we train horses. If we come out and the weather is different on a different day, it's much colder or much hotter. We have to make a certain amount of compromise in what we do because of that. In the case of the cold, we're going to spend a lot more time warming the horse up, maybe a little more on the lunge line, and also certainly a lot more on the walk. And here he goes into a nice shoulder in. See how nicely he came around that corner, went right into that rhythm. While he still swishes his tail a little bit once in a while from the contact of the legs. He used to be very bad about that. If you tried to take any contact at all, he would just immediately start grinding and swishing, and very unhappy boy. But we still see a little of that every now and then. Like you see him there, just kind of resisting a little bit when she puts her leg on, but not bad. Once again, as he comes around there in silhouette, you can still see there's a little bit of dip still in this horse's back there behind the saddle. But that's been filling up quite nicely now. But as I was saying, for him, just to be able to come out and have a nice walk like this and have a nice reasonable workout without him getting too excited and upset, basically what our goal is. So once again, as you can see, as he came across that diagonal, his head got a little higher, and he stopped moving a little bit behind. So you see as how she asks him to swing back out. Now that walk is looking much better. So you can see how the horse shortened up. So what we're always looking for is to keep the horse in that big open stride. Now, not a lengthening, not overly fast, but just that natural stride that we can find with the horse. And look how nicely he bends here in the shoulder in once again. This actually used to be his more difficult direction. But he holds that quite nicely. And once again, you'll see how we're in the snaffle with him. We rode this horse for a couple of years in a double bridle, and because he was so reactive to everything that he would literally jump out from underneath you. So we needed something just for safety. But now he's relaxed enough that he's back in the snaffle bridle and accepting the bridle very nicely. Nice foamy lips, as you'll see there. So big improvement in his level of relaxation. Now today we're working towards the counter-canter. But as you'll see, is that will only take up a very short time of what we do. We're building up to that. So as in all horses, we always start in the stretch, no matter how high a horse's level is going to go, just like a person getting ready to lift, you know. And also part of the issue of putting amber on this horse, because he definitely responds to less weight on his back. It's been very good for him, and his back hasn't gotten sore, so pretty good. Starts off here, once again, you can see how he's still a little bit stiff just starting off here today. Once again, that's mostly a feature of the cold. But you'll see he'll come around here quite nicely and start to stretch into the contact. So just as in the walk, before we can start to bring any horse up, we have to get them all the way down. So you can see that took just a moment, but it didn't take long. Pretty soon he's back in that stretch quite nicely. As I said, he just seems a little stiffer today than normal. But once again, discussing this issue of the weight, he was always a horse we've had a lot of trouble keeping him sound over his back. So I put amber on him with less weight on him, and he seems quite a bit happier about that. And we've been able to continue to pursue the canter work without his back getting sore, and that was always our problem in the past, is every time we tried to do much canter work, he'd just get sore in his back because he was so tense in the canter. But he's beginning to stretch nicely and start to swing right there. You see how he started to open up, and you see how those hocks begin to work in a round circle. That's always what we're looking for. Whenever a horse gets in a good working trot, the hocks will almost make a perfect round circle if the horse is working over their back. The hocks are making more of an ellipse, that is, they're going up and down rather than around in a circle. That tells you the horse is hollow. So good stretch here. He's starting to really get out there. And once again, notice how nice and relaxed he is. That being the biggest takeaway with this horse, how long it took for us to get him in this state where we can just ride down the ring. So what we do with him is we bring him on a circle, then we just move the circle at first down the ring rather than asking him to go straight. Once again, this was a horse who would spook about every 10 strides. So it's easier to keep him from spooking on a circle. So what we do is just gradually leg yield the circle down the ring. We do this quite often with these kinds of horses. So we can keep their attention on us. So she just keeps coming back. She moves a little bit forward, and then she starts to circle. This way we accustom the horse, to everything around the ring in this horse's case. You can see that that's what he would do there. So he finally saw a little something. That's the only time he spooks a little bit in this whole ride, so that's really quite good. Something caught his eye over there. Now, in the past, that would have been, a much more violent resistance, and it would have taken a long time to get him back. And if he, once again, if we hadn't had him in a double bridle in the past when he did that, he would just, charge off with you. You would be, in a pretty difficult position. But now he comes right back, and that's the only time he spooks throughout this day. And you can still see how he was a little bit tense when that happened. He hadn't gotten all the way down the stretch. Once again, he's a little stiffer than normal today. I believe it's because of the cold more than anything else. And you can see he still resists there a little bit. But even when she brings him up like that, he's still not breaking terribly in the neck, and that's what we're looking for. As you push him right back down in that stretch again. And once again, discussing the weight on his back. It's kind of like this, like for me, I can pick up 80 pounds over my head, but I can't even lift 90 pounds off the ground. So once again, if I work within the weights that I can lift, I can do the job. And that's kind of the way a horse with a bad back is, we have to always think of dressage as being weightlifting. The horses have to lift the weight. So in his case, you know, he would be struggling to carry my weight, whereas with Amber, he seems quite happy and comes around, you know, much more easily and is able to lift his back. So once again, there's a level, and once again, that's why they put such tiny little people on racehorses, you know, so they're not affecting the back and affecting the gaits, you know, so the horse can basically just go without weight being much of a factor one way or another. But that's even why in the racetrack why it's so important that, you know, jockeys, a few pounds can make a huge difference in how a horse moves. And once again, just as I said, you know, if you go past a certain weight, simply the horse can't lift its back up. So we have to find that level of weight that we can get a horse to carry and be comfortable. In this case with Amber, it's working really well, and we've been able to continue non-stop his training without being, you know, slowed down by his back getting sore. So I think that's about the level that he can lift it and maintain it. As I said, we have begun, though we don't do much of that today because we're working on the canter, but we have begun to sit to the trot on this horse as well. And once again, it makes a big difference how much weight you're asking the horse to carry. So here we can see he's warmed up into a nice working trot now. He's really starting to swing, looks very comfortable in his gaits. Now what I do throughout here is I have her bring him up a little bit as I did there a moment ago, and you see how he started to struggle a little bit, so we put him right back down in that stretch. So notice we did the same thing in this direction once we got started in the canter, in the trot rather, that we warmed him up and just circled, and then we just leg yield up and down the ring. So we did the same thing in both directions just to get him used to what those things are around the ring that might be affecting him. This was a horse that was always running everywhere, so just to see him slow down like this, and once again, for finally we don't have that sense of, you know, this horse kind of felt like a runaway train when we started him, and he would just take hold of your hands and just, it was just a struggle for him even to balance. Look how beautifully he's stretching here into that contact. And once again, remember, everything we're doing here is just to warm up to get to the canter work. So she brings him up there to a working trot position. So we see he's able to bring his neck up higher there. And you can see how he struggles there for a moment with that, has a tendency to want to hollow just a little bit. But she's able to finesse him once again right back down into it, and he doesn't resist for very long. So here we're just testing how high the horse can come. Now, recently, he's been doing a little better than this in the working trot, but once again, I think he just felt a little bit stiff today because of how cold it has been. Once again, we've had 5 or 6 days or 10 days in a row here in San Diego that's been below freezing at night, so that's pretty extreme. We normally get 1 or 2 nights a year here that it's that cold, so these things do affect horses. So here she asked for a little bit of lengthening. You can see how he struggled there for a minute, but once he found the right position of the head and neck, then he was able to come through and swing. So that's always what we're looking for. It's like where can the horse work correctly over its back so that he can develop, and how high can we bring that pull without affecting the gaits once we have found a nice swinging gait over his back in the stretch. So then we experiment with how high we can bring the pull. And even with a horse like this, it changes on a day-to-day basis. Now you can see how he came up there for a moment and started to resist, but he immediately just gave in and relaxed again. You can see him wanting to be a little hollow there. But while she has a few moments of struggle, he comes right back down into it. Now, we don't expect him to hold it very long. And on some days, he can hold it longer than others. That's the thing to realize with training horses, that it isn't just like we train them and then everything stays the same. You know, everything is going to affect that. If we have horses off for a couple of weeks, he's going to lose some muscle tone, so we can't bring him as high as we can. So always remembering that collection ultimately is an expression of the level of physical fitness. So just like a person, if you're fit to ride, you know, to run 9 miles, and you stop running, pretty soon you're not going to be able to run 9 miles. You might still be able to run 1 or 2, but you know, you won't be able to work at the highest level that you work at without taking a little time to get back to that position. And once again, you can see in that last circle how he resisted just a little bit coming up. Once again, we're working with that working trot position, working on bringing him up a little bit and finding how high he can work with the pole before he drops his back. So you can see him struggling just a little bit there. He gets a little bit high-headed, but she's able to soften him. Same thing there. You can see him resist just a little bit. but she's able to soften him right back into the contact. And then, of course, once we do a little of this, we're going to come back to the trot in the stretch. So we don't ask him at this level to keep that position for very long. As soon as we feel him struggling, we're going to let him right back down. Now, if we had never gotten him to relax in that position, we would have let him down anyway. Same thing. Once again, you never try to push a horse through the wall by fighting them. When you encounter resistance in horses, if you've developed everything correctly, that resistance will almost always be directly a result of the horse's physical inability. So here you see we bring him up again, he struggles, and we're going to start the canter here. So you can see he brings his head up just a little bit, wants to hollow a little bit. Remember, his tendency in the canter when we first started this horse was to throw his head back up at you and become very, very tense. And of course drop his back, and that's why his back would become sore every time we tried to canter him. So while he resisted there for a moment, kind of like the trot, he gave it in rather quickly. And now he's moving quite nicely over his back. And so we bring him right back to the trot. The big takeaway is that when we're working canter, when we're first beginning to work canter, canter is very hard on horses' legs and body. So if the horse is hollow, they're going to definitely get sore. Once again, we always improve the canter by doing more trot work, not by doing more canter work. The more canter work we do, if the horse is hollow, we don't canter them at all, because all that's going to happen is the horse is going to get a sore back and probably sore feet as well from the amount of concussion and the pressure that happens. Remember, the faster you go, the more pressure there is on the horse's feet. They say at a full gallop, a horse has something like 5,000 pounds of pressure per square inch on his feet. So we must be aware of that when we train horses. If we just keep going up and asking them for more and more, they're bound to get sore. So we have to build it up very slowly. So you see how that time he was able to make a more relaxed transition into the canter? Still wants to be a little high. We're working on getting him to a working canter position, that is, bringing his pole. And that time he settled quite nice in it. He didn't come up and hollow so much. So that was really good. So we come right back to the stretch again. So once again, short periods of the hardest work, not long periods, nor do we ever try to fight them through. So for instance, if you're working a horse, as we were working with Amber's horse on flying changes now, if the horse gets a bad flying change, we don't come back and do flying changes over again. We go back and we do work on trot, get him stretchy again, then come back to the canter and try again. In other words, don't beat, repeat. Just be sure that when a horse is resisting, that you aren't asking for something the horse is incapable of doing. So look how beautifully he comes back into that stretch. Now you can see also the trot here work is starting to have a little more bounce in it, which is more how we've had him going recently. But once again, I said it's been very, very cold. And when it's that cold, these horses get very cold deep in their bones, and it can take quite a while to warm them up. But you can see that trot is swinging more actively now. You can see it's starting to have a little bit of bounce off the ground. That is, the hind legs are beginning to elevate the forehand just a little bit. So in other words, as you see there, how he's tracking up into the track of the front feet, if the hind legs don't push and lift the back, you can't get the front feet out of the way, and that's why horses forge. So when you hear horses forging, that's why. Their back has dropped, they don't have the strength to stay in that position, so when you try to do a real working trot where the horse is tracking up in the track of the front feet, they start forging. So that's also a good sign that the horse is getting tired. So when you hear that, you want to go on, come back to a stretch, and then quit for the day, so you don't do more and more and more. Because just like for a human athlete, as you hear me talking all the time, if your muscles are gone, that is, you have depleted their abilities, you can't just keep doing it over and over again. Nothing that you do on a given day is going to help them get back there until you just let them relax again and go home and rest. So here we work him into the canter in this way. You see, same thing. He kind of wants to do that thing of pulling his head up. Now we're working him without the sham bone in the canter. So he can be a little more difficult, and he's been a little more difficult today than he normally is, just by virtue of the cold. But he's settling into it quite nicely now. It wasn't so bad that he didn't throw his head straight back or do anything terrible. He just sort of, his old mind kicked in, so to speak, which tells him, oh, pull that head up. But he quickly came around, got the neck back out in front of him, and started cantering over his back quite nicely. So that was good. Right back to the trot we go. Now, had that been any more struggle than that, as I said, we would have come right back to the trot, or even not even gone back to the canter on a given day. Once again, all the way back down that stretch. Look how we reestablished that big swinging stride. And once again, notice how he's tracking up into the tracks of the front feet. If he were not engaging his back, he would forge if he did that. So now she starts to bring him up. You see, once again, he wants to bring the head a little too high. She softens him a little bit, never by force. Gets him to lower that head again before we start trying the canter. Pretty good working trot there. Now he starts to stretch. So now we'll ask for the canter again. And while he brings his head up a little bit, we don't worry about that. We don't try to make the transition perfect. But she's able to finesse him once again back into the contact with the bridle. So we were able to keep cantering. Nice big canter stride over his back, just what we're looking for. And now he's even beginning to stretch in the canter. So always remember that we want the horse to stretch in all three gaits. Canter is never going to be great until you can stretch the horse in the canter. Contrary to popular belief, one thing I always want to point out, because I hear people saying this, there's a pretty well-known clinician who does a video on YouTube where she sits on a little rocking horse and explains to you how this is how a horse is supposed to feel, rocking back and forth. That is not at all how a horse is supposed to feel. When a horse feels correctly, it lifts and carries you. You do not feel the horse rocking back and forth in the canter. So bear that in mind. I always try to dispel myths whenever I see or hear them. So he comes back to a nice working trot here. And you can see he's just struggling just a little bit. Once again, you can see how nice and foamy his lips are there. He accepted the bridle really nicely. And that time we made a nice canter transition. So all these short little canter transitions were just for that, just to warm him up a little bit. And now we begin going large. And notice he doesn't spook at anything, that being the most important thing there. You know, it used to be the faster you went with this horse, the more he spooked, so we had to be very careful. Really nicely swinging over his back here. And we were able to move around the ring without him spooking or anything, or speeding up or running on the long side. And once again, you'll notice how much longer we're beginning to canter this horse. You can see that's the same place he spooked over there. He remembered it and wanted to look a little bit, but notice all she had to do was put her leg on and send him forward, and he immediately just came back to her. Nice in the canter there, and of course we come right back to the stretch and the trot afterwards. So again, always coming back to this. Now, as a horse progresses in training, we don't stretch as much of the time, but we always stretch numerous times throughout every workout, no matter what the level of the horse. Remember, if you keep a muscle tense, there's no blood flowing through that muscle. So in order for the muscle to grow, we have to bring nutrients to that muscle in the blood. So we must have the blood flowing. So if we keep a muscle tense for a while, we must come back and let it relax and let the blood flow back into the muscle again. As an example, this horse, when we started him, had such a bad saddle fit for God knows how long before we started him. He actually had the imprint of a saddle in his back that went all the way to the bone on his rib cage. Like, you could just see the imprint of the saddle there. And that's from a saddle that was so tight and ill-fitting that it cut off all the circulation in his back. Therefore, those muscles under the saddle did not develop because there was no blood flowing through them. That's why saddle fit is so important, folks. And you all just got a little glimpse there in the corner of Karen's new horse, which we'll be doing some videos of soon, that you just saw over there in that other ring. That's Faerber. She's actually a very, very beautiful horse that Karen is rehabbing and doing a wonderful, wonderful job with. And we'll be seeing some videos on her very soon. You see her over there stretching. So that's the first thing we've done with her, is just taught her to stretch on the same path as all the rest of them. She was also a horse that had been just shortened up. So once again, you see how he struggles a little bit when she brings the pole up. She's getting ready to canter in this direction again. But not so much resistance once again. If it hadn't come around in a few moments, I'd have had to put her right back down the stretch again. But now he's at a good midway position, and once again makes a nice transition without throwing the head. Remember what those first canter transitions were. Even taking contact right in the very beginning, he was trying to bring his head way, way high. But once again, in all these cases, he's come right around. Look at this big, beautiful canter. How big this horse's stride is. This is such a beautiful horse and such an amazing mover. But unfortunately, lived the fate of so many big horses, that is, getting shut down until he became sore and then in pain, and that's what led to all of his difficulties. A horse that's in pain is never going to be happy in the work. And remember, that pain could be nothing more than you holding against the bridle. But remember, if you're holding against the horse's mouth, you're punishing it all the time. So you wonder why so many of these horses just shut it down. That's why they do, because you're driving the car with the brakes on and the gas at the same time. So beautiful big canter here. Once again, that got more swinging and nice over his back that time, and we're able to keep going around the ring. Once again, notice how nice and floppy his ears are staying here throughout all of this, and how much longer we're cantering now. Beautiful canter there, and of course we come right back to the trot and right back to the stretch. Now we know that cantering is very hard on this horse, so it's especially important that we come back to the stretch after the canter work. But once again, even you can see how as we're going here, how much more fluently he's starting to move now. As I said, the cold is a big factor. So whenever the weather changes, it's going to change how horses are going to work and act during that work. Beautiful trot there. You can see how he's trotting right up into the track of the front feet. And you can almost see how those shoulders are now lifting freely. Once again, if the horse isn't lifting its back, there'll be no thrust from the back legs because the back has to be round in order for that thrust to complete itself and lift the horse. So now we're working up to the most important work we're going to do today is begin to introduce counter-canter with him. Always remember that you have to have counter-canter before you do flying changes. So our hierarchy of movements then for the canter would be just as they are for anything else. We'd first start with the leg yield in the canter and then a little shoulder in, and then we move on to the counter-canter before we begin thinking about flying changes. Look how beautifully he's swinging over his back now. So I think he only just now is completely warmed up inside. How much better he's moving behind, and notice conversely he's also not swishing his tail so much. So that tells me he's a lot happier, he's hanging soft. So here we're getting, see he wants to bring that neck up, but she's able to soften him and bring him right back into the trot again. So he has that sort of knee-jerk reaction to cantering, which is to thrust his head back and suck his neck back into his body. And while, once again, this horse in that tense position kind of felt like he would canter over his back, but remember, tension causes soreness. So just as in all these horses that are roll-curred, yes, they're over their back, but they're over their backs in tension, which is just as damaging as not being over your backs at all. So while he brought his head up there a little bit, that wasn't too bad. And once again, she's just finessing him there to keep his head in the right position. That was really good that time. So once again, as you can see how he has resisted a little bit, but none of those resistances have resulted in any kind of fight. Once again, this is something that we would never do. If there was too much resistance, if we couldn't correct it right away, we'd have gone right back to the stretch. So here we go, attempts at counter-canter. Beautifully done. So the first counter-canter we do is just a shallow loop serpentine out to the center line and back. And how beautifully he did that without shortening the gait and without getting upset about having to have the contact with the legs that we have to do. In order to keep the counter-canter, we have to keep ourselves in the position of the canter that we're in and just keep bumping the horse a little bit with the leg to keep him there. But he did that absolutely beautifully. And right back to the stretch. So that's what everything today has been working up to, just to get that counter-canter. As we try to bring the horse, as I always say, I like to bring my horses one step forward each day. And if I do that and make one little improvement each day, pretty soon I've got a horse that's well trained and a sound. That's one of the key things about working horses correctly over their backs is they stay sound. If they don't stay sound, you're constantly stopping and starting. I see so many dressage barns and people riding that come to me and just tell me these stories about, how the trainers are spending, even more money than what the training is on vet bills every month, trying to keep the horses going because the way they're going about doing what they're doing, the horses are always sore, so they're always needing some kind of injection or this or that. But just remember, folks, that those kind of things, all those injections into joints and things are nothing but Band-Aids, and that are ultimately going to cause more problem in the horse if you don't solve the issue. If you just keep going and don't, deal with the infection and put a Band-Aid over it, it's only going to get worse, right? Well, same is true of the horse. So we come back to a good stretch, we start to bring him up, and once again he makes a nice canter transition. Head a little higher than I would like it, but he didn't do that knee-jerk thing of bringing it really high that time. Keeps the neck out long. That's our goal here, this canter, is keeping the neck out long so he doesn't shorten. So with just a little finesse there, once again he came right back into a nice canter in the contact. See him resist a little bit in that corner, but she just softens and he comes right back. Once again, none of this is turning into a 15-minute long fight. So now we go for the second counter-canter. Goes large nicely. You can still see he's nice and floppy-eared there coming around the corner. Nice big ball rolling over the ground. And the second counter-canter. Absolutely beautifully done. So we've added another movement to his work. So that was all. That was what the entire workout today was for. Everything was just to get to that point that we could introduce that counter-canter, which we did. And by developing him up slowly before we did that, he was able to do it very nicely in relaxation. And so, of course, we come right back to the trot and right back into the stretch for his reward. So another great day with Bailador. Once again, we saw a few things here today about how stiff he was there just in the very beginning because of the cold, but we can see how he worked out of that. And you can see how he brought his head a little high at times, but she was able to finesse him and bring him right back into the stretch or the contact that she needed and go right on without any major resistance. So once again, we end every lesson where we began, in the stretch and the walk, where we stretch them in the trot, and then we come back and stretch in the walk at this level. This is Will Faerber from Art to Ride with my associate trainer Amber Matusik and Bailador. Hope everybody's having a happy new year this year, and keep up the good work with all of your horses. That's how we want every horse to leave the arena every day. Big stretching walk, right where we started. Will Faerber from Art to Ride. We'll see you next time.